Welcome, everybody. My name is Marnie Billings, Vice President of Technology for the IIBA Minneapolis-St. Paul chapter, and we welcome John Fernstall to our Professional Development Day 2022 called Future Analysis, Delivering Strategically Designed Business Solutions. And this is our online virtual conference. So a little bit about John Fernstall. He's presenting a case study today called Delta Airlines and Domain-Driven Design. John is an enterprise business architect that has over 20 years of experience working with Fortune 500 organizations, utilizing his expertise in consulting, human capital management, business process, and operations leadership. He is passionate about helping people look outside the box to match creative solutions to areas of opportunity within their organizations. John has worked on many large-scale and high-profile projects as a leader, architect, and analyst. John is also a past president of the IIBA Minneapolis-St. Paul chapter. So a warm welcome for John. Go ahead and take it away.
All right, thank you. I don't know quite how to react when I heard the 20 years, and then I realized I've got a senior in high school, so then it shouldn't be that far off. Yeah, so today we're going to talk a little bit about our journey with regards to domain-driven design and how we're going to manage this with questions and stuff. Marty and I will work back and forth. So we're going to come across some of these key learnings. There'll be some breaks. Put your questions into the chat, and Marty and I will stop and pause at those particular times, go through whatever questions you might have. As we're covering this material, I really want this to be interactive. This is a space, as you know, when you live in a particular space, you don't always know all the questions that everyone's going to be asking from different parts of their journey as they look at modernization. So as we go through this and you have questions, please just put them into the chat. And Marty and I will go through and answer as best we possibly can, or as best I can. So a little bit about what we're going to talk about today. First, we're going to talk through the journey that Delta has been on from a business architecture perspective. I really want to make sure that everybody has an understanding of how did we get here? Because we didn't just land in the destination of domain-driven design. There was a lot of work that went into that and structuring certain business architecture principles and pieces along the way. And I want to paint that picture for you because if you're just starting your business architecture practice or just starting to introduce those types of principles, you'll start to see where that fell as far as Delta's journey, and then how best to use it. Then we'll talk through how we're connecting those capabilities. How are we deploying our capabilities and look at how we're leveraging that for development. And finally, looking at how we're utilizing that in the cloud. So that's a little bit about what we're going to talk about today. First and foremost, the journey. The journey began a number of years ago. So this is actually in 2016. I, along with one of my coworkers, was tasked with going across the business and doing a wall walk. I put this picture here to kind of give you an indication. So at this time, in 2016 and up until then, Delta did not talk in terms of business capabilities and enabling certain capabilities. We typically talked in functionality and things that need to be delivered. It was very much in that vein. And as such, we needed to understand from our business what those particular capabilities were. And so we sat down with a series of workshops. We called them building business capabilities workshops with the business. And we started with various levels inside the business. And we sat down in a room, got certain portions of the business together that made sense. So like flight operations, HR, corporate communications, and we have separate sessions. Sometimes we would meld those sessions when it made sense, where we saw so much handoff between one organization to another. And then we put those big green stickers across the board and said, okay, here's a real high level of how our organization operates. Now tell us what you do. Don't tell us how you do it, tell us what you do. And we started to articulate what people are doing. And we got to a level of granularity where you can see there the green is the level one where we started walking through that. The yellow is the level two, and then we started talking about level three capabilities. And so we were able to do this in a relatively short period of time. So then we could leverage this in IT to point back to the particular applications that support these critical functions. Why is that so important? It's important from a couple of aspects. When there is, for particularly an airline, when there is a ground stoppage for whatever that might be, weather related or whatever, and that means the airplanes are stopped, they're not moving. What are the applications that support that? And what happens if those applications that support that, they are not working? We can't move aircraft. And so we needed to understand from a criticality perspective. It gave us a better insight into what the business is not able to do in relation to the technology that were enabled. And so that was part of an IT transformation at the time. And that was to help us kind of accelerate the time to market so we could understand when we start to look at cracking open some of these applications, where do some of these capabilities lie? So if a business partner wants to enable a certain new capability or build on top of another capability, we had a better understanding of the connectivity from an application stack. So that was in 2016. As we started down that journey, we got we got to a finer level of granularity. We started to understand not only the level ones, level twos, and level threes, but then we started to understand who was the owner of these capabilities. So we started to have the conversation of producers and consumers. And this is over a period of 2 years that we really started to go down this producer and consumer type conversation when we went through the capabilities. And so one of the things that we were able to do is get this to a granularity where we get to about 650. We noticed that in some areas when we went through that we were really describing functionality or started talking about a process when we got much lower than that. But our organization is so wide that really we needed to get to a level three to have a better understanding of what those capabilities were delivering. So that gets us to about 3 years ago when we were not only understanding the capabilities that we were enabling, it helped us understand the resiliency. It also helped us understand how to, as we look at like a splash pattern, as I like to call it. So if I'm enabling a capability in one particular area, what are the other consuming applications that leverage that capability? So as we were developing either new functionality in a particular application that enabled a certain capability, we knew who the other periphery business partners were and could bring them in, as well as the other IT partners that we would need to bring in. So that's where we started. As we moved down towards really trying to enable domains and start to enable the organization to move faster. We noticed that as you go to the cloud, we were struggling with the horizontal layers that we had developed as an organization. And so this is a look at our organization right here. And as we went to the cloud, we realized we really needed to change the way we structured ourselves and the way we structured the work. So this was our first step in domains, domain driven. So the first part was looking at domains. So what domains do we need to have? And then once we started to have that conversation, we said, okay, we need to start to bring the organization in alignment to that. Because as you can see here, our organization was structured with a lot of these horizontals. And what ended up happening as we were developing new functionality at the APCs, that's our Agile product category. And that really kind of is an encompassing group of products that report up to a line of business. As we looked at that grouping of products, and they would want to enable a new capability you can see from the arrows they're forcing down throughout the organization, it started to create a lot of friction. And as you create that friction, you also start to create a lot of redundancies. You also started to have a lot of resource constraints because you can see each one of these horizontals is another team. So as I'm trying to implement a new piece of functionality, this really slowed us down from development perspective. It also made it very hard to explain to the business, why is it taking so long to enable a new capability? When we started to show that this is how our organization was aligned to deliver technology components, started to understand where we were starting to get a lot of the friction and where we were starting to see a lot of the organizational conflict that happened and was arising. The other problem with this was that we were blind to a lot of the capabilities that might be enabling, and it made it incredibly hard um, to create a hierarchy for the teams as far as what should we be working on, when should we be working on them. So what we did is, as we moved from this model, we started to move to this model where the domain in and of itself owns a set of product teams, and all of those, I'm going to go back and forth here, so I hope you don't mind. As you see, the layers here, the horizontal layers, the SOA, API, the platform, all of these things, we start to see, we want them folded up underneath the domain. What this is going to start to do is we don't have that redundancy. We don't have a lot of the friction as we start to look at the requirements that are getting passed down to the different teams. We don't have that anymore. So what we can do is we can have a cohesive backlog where people understand the capabilities that they're enabling. The other piece that, as we're going through this journey, and it is a journey, we're just starting it now within the last year, what we're starting to see is from those service layers getting absorbed into the domains, they're really looking at a SOA operation as a set of requirements that my domain is delivering to the organization. So you'll see I'm balancing a little bit between the IT side of things and the business side of things. So each one of these domains aligns to a particular business. We'll talk a little bit more about domains, talk a little bit more about what that ownership of that domain means to us as an organization, and how we're starting to enable some of the products within that. So let's talk about domains. Brought it up briefly a couple of different times. So first and foremost, I know that there's a lot of information about domain-driven design out there. There's a lot of different pieces out there that you guys can probably see, hear, and learn from. We decided to take an approach of looking at, what does the industry say? What are some of the clinical terms? What are some of those things that we can use? But what makes sense for us? And so as you see this, what I'm going to show you is what works for Delta and what's worked for our business, what's worked for IT. As we start to describe some of these things, you'll notice that some of the terminology is a little bit different. You'll also notice that some of the descriptions are a little bit different. But really, to get the adoption that we needed to understand what worked for our organization, and we couldn't be so clinical and an ivory tower about a lot of these different principles. So a lot of it was with the mutual agreement that we started to define these things as an organization, which made adoption a lot easier. So talking about domains. So what is a domain? It's a purposeful sphere of knowledge, vocabulary, and activity. It's a little bit like we start talking about HR, or we talk about maybe sales or different parts of our organization. It's a sphere that's protected in and of itself. So it was actually interesting. Had this presentation and was working with our CIO, and he said, "What's with the floating islands?" Well, we really wanted to depict in this as it is an ecosystem unto itself. It supports itself. It has capabilities. That doesn't mean that other domains couldn't utilize some of the capabilities that are within that domain. It just really means that it is a self-serving sphere. It is an ecosystem unto itself. The piece that we really don't want to get lost, that's part of who Delta is the people. So we've talked a lot about capabilities. We've talked a lot about technology and some of the other pieces, the blocking and tackling. But what we don't want to forget is the people. And as we go through this transformation, We really want to make sure that people understand where they fit, understand the value that they're delivering. So when we talk about domains, it isn't just from that purposeful sphere of vocabulary and activity, it also is a people-centric sphere. It helps the organization align the right individuals in the right roles to the work and helps them understand the capabilities that they're going to be enabling. There isn't this lost in a drift of multiple organizations coming to me asking for multiple different requirements to be met. This helps build a little bit more of a focus and protection for those individuals. Some of the other terminology that we use here, really, so we've already kind of talked a little bit about the first one as a domain, but from that domain, we start talking about products, and I'm sure a lot of organizations are used to those. But what we at Delta started looking at when we start talking about products is, who is my customer? So I have a domain, and from an HR perspective, my customer is internal, it's not a passenger. But we have domains like passenger movement, and their customer is an end user. And so when we start talking about products, we need to make sure that those products are centered around who our customer is. That's how we started to look at things. And as we start to define the products, we want to make sure that things like in certain parts of our organization, we don't have what is an operational thing. So let's say flight operations that services the tower and people like that. We wouldn't have a DevOps product, because there's nobody in a tower, there's no airport agent that's going to see DevOps as a particular product. So that's where we're at. How we're defining this is, it needs to be something that our business understands as a particular piece of value that they would go and look to implement on. From that, we start talking about processes. The airline is full of very intricate and heavy processes. It's one of those things where if you've had experience working for an airline, you kind of know what it's like. It's hard to explain, but once it gets in your blood, the fun, the excitement around understanding processes and breaking all of those down is incredibly important. How we broke this down is we started to say this, it's a set of tasks and events. Why the importance I put on the events there is because when we go through domain-driven design, and we'll get to that in a little bit, how we're doing domain-driven design, we start doing event storming. And so when we start having conversations around the business and saying, let's stitching together a series of events or tasks, it helps the business articulate, oh yeah, this is how we do things in a process format. It also helps individuals in IT to go, oh right, we're talking about a business process, a set of business events that are around that. And then when we talk about capabilities, again, this is that particular knowledge or activity that implements against that process. I'll give you a breakdown that has really helped our organization kind of understand process capability here in a little bit. And then finally, we've got capability component. You might have seen some of this in, if you read a lot about DDD as aggregates. We decided to stay away from that. We went more kind of in the middle between packaged business capability, which you'll see out there as well, and capability component. This is where the code is being developed. These is where you're going to start to see that those microservices developed. So when we talk about capability components, why did we come up with a name that made sense for us? Why did we go off script? One of the reasons was when we started talking about aggregates, we saw that domains were creating capabilities that they didn't own. I'll use an example. An example is our digital space that owns Delta.com or Fly Mobile. They were creating products that would show what the current flight status is. They don't own that data, they don't own that capability, but they were creating it. They're pulling data from across the organization to enable a capability they didn't really own, and they were calling those aggregates. So when we go into a domain and we start to kind of dismantle what they own and what they have as far as technology, they'd start talking about these aggregates. So right off the bat, we said we can't use aggregates going forward because everyone will assume that that's a capability I'm enabling, but I don't really own the capability. So that's our journey. So again, we kind of look at that and kind of go from the bottom up. The capability component is our particular piece of code that maps to a capability, that enables a process, that is a part of a collection or are part of products, and then roll under a particular domain. So talking a little bit about process and how we roll out our processes and how we think about processes here. I took one breakdown from HR, and this is really just the kind of looking at it and going, okay, let's talk about a process in a series of events or tasks. So we broke that down here. You can see in a series of 4 different events or tasks that are part of talent acquisition. Well, if we pull one of those particular events out and we say, let's review applications or screening candidates, what are some of the capabilities that are enabling that task? So this is what we use as kind of our baseline when we're describing doing event storming, understanding the capabilities, then getting to the capability components. So this is just the raw piece. And a lot of people look at this and go, well, that seems pretty basic. When you get a room together of people and they don't all speak the same language, this is incredibly important to kind of understand both visually when we say events, and then also understanding the capabilities and how they're supporting those particular events. Finally, a really important piece that we talk about a lot in a lot of our sessions is we speak with regards to bounded context. What's your bounded context? So you'll hear people talk about an event or capability. We want to know their bounded context. Another way of saying this, what's your lens on that particular item or that particular task or capability? And I use this quite a lot. So when we talk about sales here in the bounded context, we're really looking at how we focus on a particular item. So as you see here, there's 2 domains. There's a sales domain and there's a support domain, sales support domain. Both of those 2 domains have product. That's just fine. But how they view that, their bounded context to that product is very different. It helps us define the ownership of that particular item. So from a sales perspective, when we talk about products, we're talking about what's my commission, what's the available inventory, how is this solving a particular customer's problem or need. That's how they start to look at products. When we see from a support side of things, customer support side of things, they look at product. Is the product working? Is there some sort of knowledge gap or training that needs to be developed as we start talking about products? And that's the bounded context that 2 parts of the organization have. When we walk through this with organization, we started to define the domains and define different people's ownership in those domains. We really wanted to force this conversation because you have, just like in every part of the organization, there's one group that wants to own everything, and there's another group that says, man, I'm not so sure. Let me see if I want to own that particular capability. Having the conversation around bounded context lets people know what I own, why I own it, and what people should come to me for. And that's a little bit about that. Finally, we created a set of processes. This is our domain-driven design process. So as we embed with each one of the domains, we came up with about 39 domains. I think that will, as we start to mature through this process, we'll see that number change a little bit as an organization. But when our coaches go and embed with the domain and they start to understand this is their sequence or phases of, I like to call it as DDD. We'll get a little bit more into what this all means, a little bit more into the granularity a little bit later, but these are the phases of DDD from an enterprise perspective. And I'll show you then what we expect them to do as a domain after we're done kind of helping organize and create that structure. So with that, I've got a brief opportunity to pause. Are there any particular questions on some of the stuff that we covered, Marnie? Or is there anybody who wants to add anything to the chat? See if there are any questions.
Great time to pause. No questions in the chat, but if you'd like to take yourself off mute, please feel welcome to do so. Okay, we do have a question from Lauren. How do the domains relate to the business capabilities?
Yeah, it's a great question. So what we started to do is as we had the conversation with the domains, we started to have that process around what capabilities do you enable across the organization. So we definitely have a group of ownership. Each domain owns a set of capabilities. Each domain looks at those capabilities as either capabilities they themselves are using or capabilities that the enterprise is using. So every domain in essence becomes an enterprise service, so to speak. And having that context around the capabilities that they own and develop and enable, that's how we do it. So it's a lower level of what we do as a domain, from like an HR or a flight ops or any of those other kind of perspectives. Passenger movement's another great one. So we define the boundaries of the domain. So I'll get through kind of how we define the boundaries, the boundaries of the domain. We'll talk about that a little bit later, but we define the boundaries of the domain. Then we get into what are the capabilities inside the boundaries of that domain. Any other
Wonderful.
questions?
Yeah, no other questions at this time.
Great. So when we talk about domain ownership, and sorry if, as you can see, our corporate communications department wanted to make sure that I scrubbed this so that we don't have, you'll see this kind of show up in a couple of different areas. There's some things I can show, some things I can't show, but this is one in particular. So what we did is with this particular item here is that as we broke down the domains, we really wanted to have a director own each one of the domains. Why is that so important? It's important to have that single threaded ownership so that they can make decisions and have discussions around what are the roles that I need, what are the responsibilities, what is the ability to interact with the business. Having that one person that owns a domain and a set of capabilities inside that domain gives a lot more autonomy to the team, but it also starts to give the director a little bit more ability to work with the business on future enablement and things like that. This has been one of the biggest accelerators in our modernization journey has been this single director owning a domain, because they can make certain decisions quicker. What we had before is, as you can kind of see here, there's a migrate set of applications, containerized applications. And this is our move to the cloud, right? And then we've got modernize, so operations and ODE. This kind of gives the director an understanding of, from an IT side of things, the capabilities that they're enabling, the technology that they're enabling. And so what we're doing with this in particular is it lets them know what learning journey every single individual in their domain is going to need to go through from an IT perspective, lets them know that the types of capabilities that those applications that they support are enabling, and lets them start to set future strategy based on that. So
John,
this
we
is,
do have a
go
couple
ahead.
of questions. I'm sorry to
Sure.
interrupt. Is that
No,
okay?
no. Yeah,
Okay,
perfect.
thank you. So forgive me, I don't know if it's Dartri Mishra has a question about how do you evaluate capability, usage / importance of a capability within the domain?
So usage or importance. So there's a couple of different ways. Well, one is when we have criticality tiers. We've described them in business terms. So like our first most critical capabilities are anything that enables a ground stop. And a ground stop is, again, anytime planes are not taking off. And that is our most critical capability. So what we do is we sit with the business. We have a tiering system for criticality that we've worked with the business on, and there's 4 tiers off the top of my head. Out of those 4 tiers, they have different types of impacts. Maybe I think the level 2 is, and so one is the I can't get planes off the ground. It's mission critical. I can't do this. The next one might be severe revenue impact. So that's our tier 2. And we kind of tier those. And what we do is we can kind of, because we've used business terms to define our criticality, we can then go to our business inside the domain and say, which one of these capabilities, and rely on the business, which one of these capabilities points back to which one of these tiers. And from there, we can then map that back to the applications that they support. So one of the ways that we're looking at doing, not looking at, but how we are doing right now are microservices as those particular capabilities going through a BIA assessment. And that assessment kind of goes through the, what are the capabilities, where do they map on our hierarchy? Does that answer that question?
Well, great. If it doesn't, please let us know in the chat. Nice job, John. Kim also has a question. Are there any mechanisms in place to help avoid duplication of efforts or to share commonly used capabilities?
Yeah, that is where we're going. So that's kind of on our roadmap here. As we're going through this, we have already found duplication. So one of the particular items, as right now, we do know that there are multiple capabilities that are duplicated across our organization. What we have to have is a conversation with the two different business units, because what a lot of times we're seeing is that there's this right where the boundaries are of the two domains. So I'll give a great example. There's one part of our organization that loads cargo and bags onto the plane. And you see them when you climb on the plane, you see them loading the bags and going through that. They're given what is called a load plan. Every airline has this. That load plan comes from the operational control center that says, this is how much fuel is on this plane, this is how much cargo can go on this plane, this is where we want that cargo to go on this plane. And that comes from a different part of our organization. That's our flight operations. So there's this load planning and then the actual loading of the aircraft to plan, so load to plan. And so right where those two kind of start to merge, what we saw was we had two applications that were doing the exact same things, but for two different parts of the organization. Because those capabilities are so tightly coupled through this design, what we were able to do is we said, okay, because we've done the mapping of what capabilities support what applications, we saw that right away as we started doing DDD. And so we went to the business and we said, there's no reason for us to have two applications doing these very similar and almost the exact same capabilities at times. So what we did is we said, we're going to come up with a set of microservices that are going to be owned by one particular team, and we'll have one single UI that you as a business can have. And what we'll do is we'll eliminate that duplication, and you guys can work better as an organization on when there's future enhancements that come to regards to load planning or how we load an aircraft. You're both able to get the benefit from that. So we had that conversation. It was the first time the business had been brought in on a you might be losing an application type of a conversation. But what we were able to do is show is we went through the design. We started to kind of design, what does this possibly look like? What would the UI kind of look like if we started to merge some of the functionality? We presented it to the business in a relatively quick fashion. I want to say it was took us about a sprint and a half to really work through that, deliver it to the business and say, what do you think of this proposal? And as we go to the cloud, obviously it'll reduce our costs going forward. The business thought it was a great idea. And so that's what we're implementing currently. So is there a mechanism that is finding all of these things? No, it's more based on our individual coaches working through this. Now, when we go to the cloud, as we're producing these and putting them into the cloud, we have what's called a block code. And what that block code starts to do is it's listing all of the capabilities that particular microservice has. So we go level 1, level 2, level 3. These are your 3 levels of capabilities. We label that particular microservice with that particular capability. So now we have that as part of our inventory. So going forward, we will, and going forward into the cloud, we will. So you can search for a particular capability that maybe you want to subscribe to as another domain, you'll have that going forward. So yeah, it's something that we're currently working through as we make our journey to the cloud. Any other questions?
Great example, according to Kim. So thank you so much. We're ready to move forward.
Great. So as we look at this one, I'm going to be a little bit quick as we go through this because we've hit a lot of these things. This is really, I really want to talk about the blue piece, our business capabilities. And as we've talked to our business and IT, we really look at this as our anchor point. This is the concrete foundation that both our organizations can leverage. And the reason I say that is you look at the left-hand side here and you look at the products and the domain, that is the language of the business and how they're starting to organize themselves. And we talk about the capabilities that we have, and we say, okay, this is what we're enabling, and it allows us to, from an IT side of things, know exactly what we are delivering on and what products that they're a part of. So we really look at the blue here as kind of that concrete that's holding our two blocks together. And it lets the IT side of things, I think this is incredibly important from a business and IT perspective. It lets the business know what we're working on from an IT perspective so they know that the value is getting there and what enhancements are being made. From an IT side of things, it's incredibly liberating to know exactly what capabilities you're enabling and how important you are to the business. It's something that's, again, ingrained in a lot of the things that we do in development on the Delta side of things. We work hard at trying to be a family. And this is one of those things where this has been a really great anchor point in bringing the two sides of the family together so that we're speaking the same language, we're enabling the same capabilities. We know where our money is being spent. This has been an incredibly beneficial piece for us to look at and how we map things going forward. So this is our DDD, kind of why are we doing this? And again, I won't blow through the whole entire piece, but really when we kind of look at this, it increased speed to market. So as you can see, owning the set of capabilities within a domain and having that speed to market is incredibly important. And then when we talk about, improved developer productivity, if I know what capabilities I am working on, I can enable them across across the organization. And I have an understanding of what my backlog is. I'm not getting hit from multiple parts of the organization. I am in my own ecosystem. When we talk about reducing costs, again, this goes back to not reducing headcount, not reducing individuals and their productivity. What we're talking about here with the overall reduce the costs is really eliminating inefficiencies, eliminating, like we talked about, the duplicative applications that were out there that were being supported by multiple people. And now we can focus on new product development rather than just kind of in a support only mode, which again is helping a lot with the employee satisfaction because they can see the work going forward. All right. Any other questions before we kind of move on through the domain-driven design slides?
No questions in the chat, John.
All right. So let's talk a little bit about this. So I said we'd come back to this. So this is our phases of DDD. What we did is we aligned, and you see the dark blue at the top. We outlined what those phases are. Then we gave the directors, again, because we have this aligned by the director, we outlined it there in the light blue. Who needs to be a part of each one of these phases? What should their expectations be? So it allowed us to kind of not only go through a phased approach with the domains, it allowed them to know when their business needed to be a part of the conversation. Also it helped us understand when we weren't seeing particular participation, we can go back to the verbal contract that we have and say, hey, director, we need to make sure that the business stays engaged. I know that some of this conversation leaned a little technical, but we need to make them engaged. And they go, oh, okay, which phase are we in? And in which part of those outcomes are we in? That's that light gray, the different types of outcomes and activities that happen during those phases. Which one of those phases? Maybe we've got the wrong business partner in there. So we're able to articulate that all the way through. Then we've got our pieces at the bottom, which we'll go through a little bit from a high level. Those are our outputs. So we start to look at the different types of documentation. What do I own? What am I producing? And that's those different documents at the bottom. So when we do our event storm, you can see here, this is how we do it. We use Mural. When we do domain-driven design, we use Mural quite heavily. And as you see here, we have a sticky note, a virtual sticky note for everything and kind of a key here. So from the top, we have the event. This is again that task that we talked about a little bit earlier. And then we've got commands, our capability component, which is again our package business capability. And then we've got a particular external system that we might be working with. And then in the green, we've got the data that might be out there, a particular policy, a sub process, and then we've got in red different types of questions. And what you'll see here listed across the bottom, and this is just an example, this isn't a Delta example, but this is just an example of how that event storm might start to look. You'll see that you'll have particular checkout info, that's data that's related to you being checked out. Then you submit the order, checkout service, it kind of gives you a bit of a flow. So here is our modernization effort for passenger movement. So how do we, this goes back to one of the questions, how do we set those bookends for a particular domain? So we start by saying, okay, passenger movement is the day of travel. That's how we've defined it. Well, what inside of day of travel does passenger movement on? Passenger movement is really about your experience when you're in the airport. So we started at the top and kind of said, okay, here's the day of travel. Excuse me, I'm gonna grab a little water here. So as we look at the day of travel, we start to go, okay, well, that's our overall scope where we fall. But what are we doing at the airport? And you start to see, okay, well, we've got some online stuff that happens day of travel. We don't really own that. We handle stuff that happens at the curb, the lobby. Then you've got the lobby agent activities. We kind of started bundling out these different types of subcategories, maybe sub processes, maybe areas of ownership. Really let the business start to have that conversation and IT have that conversation of what's a large grouping of activity and where does that happen? So as we started to have that, we started to come into what is our boundaries? And that's really from the the curb, all the way to the gate agent. And that's when you're on the aircraft. And that's how we've defined passenger movement. So from that, then we start to go through event storming. So here, as you can see, I had to blur out a lot of the activities that happen in here. From here, you can see, okay, we've got gate identified. So if you kind of came back here, you saw gate agent there in the far right little box. Then we kind of sort of break that down even further as we did the event storming. We go, okay, what are the other sub processes that are a part of this? There's passenger identification, there's managing the flight, there's boarding, there's sky priority, and then went through the subsequent tasks, events, and data associated to that.
John, this is really incredible. So was this a cross-functional team that addressed all of these sections?
So yeah, well, this is so what we have, how we're organized as an organization is, this was not only IT, but it was business, and they were all supporting airport customer service as a whole. And so what we were able to do is there's some airport functions like fueling an aircraft that's owned by the kind of the airport functions. This is more customer focused. There's operation stuff that happens at the airport. This is more customer focused, and this domain was born out based on the airport customer service agents and IT coming together to start to work through this particular event storm.
Thank you.
Yeah. So then what we do is we start to go, okay, well, let's start harvesting these capabilities. And again, sorry for having to blur this all out, but as you can see here, we go, okay, when I manage a flight as a airport customer service agent, what does that mean? And what are the types of events that you see that airport customer service agent doing? And what data is associated with what that airport customer service agent is doing? And so what you start to see is these little yellow boxes that show up that are articulating the business capabilities that are, sorry, the packaged business capabilities that are being developed. And so what we do is we keep those packaged business capabilities off to the side until later. So as we start to go through this kind of capability harvesting, we start to apply those capabilities. So here we go from event storming, where we're talking about everything. Then we zero in on one particular item and we say, let's give it a name. What are we doing here? What is this particular package business capability? What is the specific area of activity or knowledge that we're implementing here? So that's what we start to talk about here when we start harvesting those capabilities from across the board. Then again, what we start to do here is we'll map it all. So it's that kind of, we've got Humpty Dumpty, right? We broke all of these processes out and these capabilities out. Well, now we've got to put it all together. And this is us kind of going, okay, here's all of these yellow sticky notes. There are capability components. How are they talking to each other? And this is all business language. I want to get a passenger's ticket information. I want to get a flight number. I want to get like, so these are the conversations that you see on each one of these lines. And so it's gives and gets as an organization across these different capability components. So here we're talking about it in the domain. Here are the gives and gets that these capability components have to one another to execute on this larger process. So it helps us understand from forward to backwards to make sure that we've stitched all the processes together. Then finally, we put together these capability component canvases. So when we put these canvases together for each one of those capability components, we list out what APIs they might have, what are the externals, a description, the policies, the data, the UI. This then allows the business to go, okay, I understand what you are developing. I get this capability component. We then register this information in our repository. And then it gives the developers something that they can right away start basically developing the swagger, start actually doing the coding. And that's when we get into constructing an MVP. So us from an enterprise perspective, help them walk through the first MVP and do this whole entire construction. And then finally, we hand it off to the domain themselves. And that allows them to start to kind of continue to iterate through the DDD. When we go through this from an enterprise perspective with each one of the domains, we fully expect it to be anchor points and not 100% correct. Some of those capability components might need to be iterated on once or twice more. But what we've given is a framework for the domain itself to start to drive and move forward. And we can support it from an enterprise perspective. With that, I think that we've talked a little bit about kind of how Delta views things. I want to tie it all together. So from a business architecture perspective, as a person that's in business architecture but sits in IT, we really do look at ourselves as a family. And what we found is through domain-driven design is a way for us to be bound even closer together so that we have an understanding of what we're working on. We can speak the same language so that we can be devoted to the same principles and concepts as we deliver those things for the passengers. So with that, we'll turn it over. Are there any particular questions or items that you want to address before we wrap up?
Thank you so much, John. There are no new questions in the chat yet. Oh, one just popped in. And again, forgive me, I believe it's Shao Hair. What was the experience from the business side / IT side before the DDD process implementation?
I guess it's hard to say what we were looking for from a question perspective. I don't entirely know, but a little bit of it is some domains have great relationships with business and IT, and they work quite a bit. Others have a bit of, we'll develop the requirements on the business side and toss it over the wall. We work in an agile way. I think we do have. I guess I say that in an agile way. I think we do waggle. There's a bit of waterfall and agile in there, but I think from an experience side of this before DDD, things have been working just fine. The relationship's fine. It just was a bit of a mystery. It's a bit of a mystery of why things take so long. What capabilities am I really enabling? What are my priorities? And that has been a lot of the change in moving to this DDD.
Excellent. What level, this is from Lauren, what level of leadership helped to drive this shift to domain-driven design?
It was architecture. It was, I think part of it is as you move to the cloud, and I don't know where everybody is and, their particular cloud journey. So we're at the beginning stages. We're 1 year into a multi-year going to the cloud journey. Um, as you look at the best ways to go to the cloud, um, this is what's recommended by everybody from Gartner to even AWS is now recommending this as the best approach. From a Delta perspective, I was a bit of the lone torchbearer. I was the only business architect um, that was talking a lot about these things. So if you're out there and you're out feeling a little bit alone, like your work doesn't get the glory, I went from famine to feast relatively quickly as we started to go to the cloud. This is, like I said, if senior leadership goes to any conference with Gartner or starts talking to AWS, this is what they're talking about. That has been my particular journey. That's been Delta's journey. I think a lot of this kind of just came down to common sense on how we want to develop modernization in the cloud.
Great. Thank you, John. We have a question
Yeah.
from Jackie N. I'm about to start a project that sounds very similar to parts you just talked about. Do you have any advice for a business analyst role in this process?
Be comfortable with ambiguity. Things are going to change. Um, Consensus is your best friend. Those are some of the things that I could say. Um, I think walking in thinking we have a plan, we know exactly how it's all going to work. We don't need to do lessons learned. We've done a lot of retros. We've done a lot of what can we be doing better? Where do we need to pivot? How do we need to pivot our message? How do we need to pivot how we do work? We've even from a business architecture perspective shifted once or twice just to accommodate the rest of the organization and the needs as an organization. So I think being extremely flexible. I think the other piece is constantly communicating. We've got walk around decks that just talk about what we're doing. And so it helps bring everybody back to the same message of what is it that you're doing? What part does this roll up to? And kind of be on the same message and understanding a common shared vision. That would be some of my takeaways.
Excellent. Thank you. And Jackie says, thanks so much. John, are you comfortable if I share your email address in the chat if people have additional questions once they
Sure thing.
digest some of
It's a
this?
scary place. So feel free to send me an email if I don't get back to you. I apologize. I'm working on it, but yeah, feel free to send me an email. If I can answer any questions, I certainly will.
Okay, great. Last call for questions. This particular session is slated to run in for 9 more minutes. So if you have a
Oh, is it?
question,
I was
yeah.
told it was done at 2, so I apologize.
Oh,
I
perfect timing.
shuttled
Nope,
right through.
nope. We have a little padding there. If anybody has one last question, we would welcome you to put that in the chat. Otherwise, we can proceed with closing with a huge thank you to John. It has been our pleasure to have you speak to our IIBA Minneapolis St. Paul chapter. And again, he was a former president of IIBA, so a shout out and a huge thank you for that as well.